Cat Days by Griffin Rose on AO3. Episode 46. Chapter 13. Let's see how far we've come. Another night, another cup of tea, at 3 in the morning. At this point, it was muscle memory for Izuku. He didn't have to focus on heating the electric kettle or rummaging for the tea bags, and he let his mind wander to the day ahead, absolutely keeping his thoughts away from the nightmare that woke him up. He was so lost in his own head, he'd never noticed anyone entering the kitchen. So when Todoroki called his name, while he stirred the honey, he jumped a foot in the air, morphing into a cat midair and landing with his fur bristled. Todoroki snorted. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." Izuku morphed back, crouched against the cabinets, heart racing. If he hadn't been awake before, he sure was now. "It's okay. I should have been paying more attention." Todoroki quickly patted over. Socks, nothing more than a whisper on the floor, and he held out a hand to help Izuku back up. "I'm used to moving quietly at the night, and I didn't think anyone else would be down here." Accepting Todoroki's hand, Izuku climbed back to his feet. "You say that like you aren't just as quiet during the day." Out of all their classmates, Todoroki ranked top 5 for stealth. It came as a total surprise to all of them, since Todoroki was clearly a flashy powerhouse, and powerhouses weren't known for being quiet. For Todoroki, though, quiet was almost a personality trait. Izuku kind of hated it. It would be one thing if Todoroki had actually trained to be that way, but his sneakiness was a learned behavior from how he grew up. He never intentionally studied stealth techniques. He cultivated them to get around his father without getting in trouble. As painful as it was to think about, the skills would at least come in handy now. Izuku tried to focus on that, while reaching for his tea. "I could be louder," Todoroki suggested. He brought down a mug and the green tea box, fiddling with his own cup, with the water still left in the kettle. "But I kind of enjoy making others jump." Izuku rolled his eyes. "Of course you do." Humming, Todoroki sipped at his tea. "What are you doing up anyways?" "Having a cup of tea?" Izuku stated. "Why are you up?" "Nightmares," he said. He wrapped his hands around his mug. "Fuyumi said a CPS agent called her the other day, and I kept thinking about how everything could go wrong still." "I didn't realize the investigation was that far along," Izuku said. With the dorms, he hadn't even realized the case was ongoing. So much had happened in the last few weeks, he had forgotten all about it. Todoroki hummed and sipped at his tea. "I can't decide if it's worth it." "Of course it's worth it," Izuku insisted. He tilted his head. "Is it? I live in the dorms now, and Deborah can't touch me here. But once he finds out what's going on, he'll be furious. I don't want him taking it out on Fuyumi or Mom." No wonder Todoroki was having nightmares. He knew firsthand what his father was capable of, and his mother and sister couldn't protect themselves the way he could. "We'll make sure they're safe," Izuku promised. "And Deborah has to be held accountable for what he did." "That's just as terrifying," Todoroki whispered. His hands tightened around his mug, and he leaned over the counter. "If the case is successful, and he's charged with abuse, what then?" Izuku allowed a glimmer of pride in his chest at Todoroki voicing the word abuse. It wasn't easy to assign that label to your personal life. Before he could form a proper answer, Todoroki kept going. "A crime like that, he'd be stripped of his hero license. He's the #1 hero now, and things are already falling apart with the loss of All Might. If people lose Endeavor in the same year, they'll lose faith in heroes altogether. Not to mention the media would never leave me or my family alone. They'll hound us every time we set foot outside. I know I'm already signing up for life like that, but Mom and Fuyumi and Natsuo don't deserve that." He was hunched over the counter at this point, head in his hands, as he verbally spiraled. Izuku put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, it's gonna be okay." "You can't tell me I'm wrong," Todoroki said. "That's why I don't know if it's worth it to keep the case going. Winning against him is going to be a bigger loss in the end, because despite everything he's done to this family, He's still a damn good hero, and we need him out there. That doesn't mean he gets a pass on everything he's done, Izuku stated. He pulled Todoroki's shoulders back a little to look at his face. Listen to me. Is getting him arrested going to be a huge shock to people? Yeah, probably. But it would have been no matter what else was going on. Even if All Might hadn't just retired, and people aren't blind, they can see how he acts towards people. Learning he treated his family the same won't surprise them as much as you think. Is that a good thing? I don't know, Izuku admitted. I wish I could tell you. Nothing would change if he's arrested, but we both know that's not true. We can't predict how people will react, or what they'll think. Todoroki squeezed his eyes shut. Izuku gripped his shoulders. We can't let that stop us from doing what's right. What if this isn't right, though? Todoroki asked. It's not an active problem anymore. He still needs to be held accountable, Izuku insisted. How could he put this so Todoroki would understand? If someone murdered their wife 10 years ago, even though they aren't likely to murder anyone again, you'd still want them arrested, wouldn't you? Todoroki snorted. There's a difference between murder and getting slapped around a bit. Not if you get slapped around so much it ruins your life, Izuku said. Your mom has been in a hospital for almost 10 years because of him. That warrants some kind of justice, don't you think? It took a moment before Todoroki nodded. It does. But I'm still not sure it's a good idea to mess with the hero charts again so soon. Izuku dropped his forehead against Todoroki's shoulder. The concern for the rest of the world was touching, and Todoroki had raised some valid points that made Izuku hesitate. But for the love of God, could Todoroki just think of himself for once? You are worth it, Todoroki. You're having nightmares about what Endeavor will do if he finds out about the case. This is what the hero you're trying to defend? Todoroki tensed under him. I'm not defending him. I'm not thinking of stopping the case for his sake. If there weren't any repercussions, I'd out him to the media and be done with it. No, Todoroki was considering the rest of the world with this, and Izuku didn't know what to say to make him feel better. He wished he could throw his cat self at this problem, but he didn't think purring would get him anywhere. Forget the media. Forget the rest of the world, Izuku begged. What's the best thing for you and your family? It's not that easy, Todoroki whispered. How the world reacts will affect them too. I don't think the guilt from destabilizing society will do us any favors. Izuku was going to scream. They were talking in circles and neither of them were going to budge. I'm sorry, Todoroki said. You're trying so hard to help me and I just can't accept it. Todoroki attempted to pull away, but Izuku wrapped his arms around him and pressed his face against Todoroki's back. Please, Izuku whispered. Trust me and my dad. Maybe society will implode. Maybe it won't. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, but Todoroki, we have to go through with this. We can't let Endeavor get away with this. No hero, no matter their ranking, should be allowed to get away with this sort of thing. Todoroki rested his hands over Izuku's. Crime is already bad enough with All Might's retirement. How bad do you think it'll be if Endeavor is arrested? That's not your problem, Izuku said. He timed his hug. If someone gets hurt because Endeavor wasn't there to stop some thug, that's my fault. Todoroki trembled in Izuku's arms, and his voice wavered. Other heroes will pick up the slack, Izuku said. There's over 1,000 heroes. We'll be okay, just please, please, let us protect you. He should have seen this breakdown coming. But the moment Todoroki crumbled to the floor, and muffled sobs caught him off guard. Yelping, Izuku followed him down. His own tears weren't far off, but he forced him down to comfort Todoroki. They eventually moved out to one of the couches, and Izuku snagged a blanket on the way. Todoroki kept apologizing, telling Izuku to go back to bed. Izuku hushed him every time and snuggled closer, continuing to calm down and rub circles on his back. The tears didn't last long, but neither of them moved. Izuku leaned back against the armrest of the chair. Todoroki pulled against him and rested against his chest. You didn't get to drink your tea. Todoroki murmured. Izuku snorted and started running a hand through Todoroki's hair. He was mimicking what Shouta did for him, so he wasn't sure Todoroki would find it as calming as Izuku did, but his friend's eyes shut with a sigh. I can live without it tonight. Todoroki hummed, half asleep, already after all that crying. They were probably going to be in trouble coming morning for sleeping down here, and if their classmates spotted them before they woke up, they'd never hear the end of it. But neither of them would sleep if they went back to their rooms now, so shifting until they were both more comfortable, Izuku kept playing with Todoroki's hair until he fell asleep. When he finally passed out himself, his hands were still tangled in red and white locks. They almost didn't make it to class on time come morning. Neither of them had their phones, and therefore no alarm, and the back of the couch hid them from the view of their classmates coming down for breakfast. Mornings tended to be quiet regardless, so it took a while before the ambient noise woke either of them. Shit, Midoriya, wake up. Todoroki pushed himself up, none too gently, using Izuku's face. I'm up. He sat up, wildly looking around to see what was going on. Holy shit, you two! Kaminari exclaimed. Todoroki scrambled off the couch, tripping over the blankets. We overslept. What time is it? It's 7:43, Jiro supplied. Panic rose to Izuku. Classes started at 8, and it was a 10-minute walk there. He vaulted back to the couch and raised Todoroki to the stairs. Panting, he barged into his room and threw on his uniform, looping his tie around his neck to deal with later, and then shoved his toothbrush in his mouth. His bag was already packed, thankfully, so he ran back downstairs to grab a granola bar or something. Todoroki was a minute behind, hair unkempt, and the buttons on his uniform misaligned. Izuku tossed him a granola bar, and they took out of the dorms, somehow making it to class with 2 minutes to spare. He all but collapsed in his desk. So, you two spent the night on the couch, huh? Hagakure asked, a floating uniform perched on the edge of his desk. It was an accident, Izuku said. He was still trying to catch his breath, and the adrenaline hadn't quite faded from his system yet. His hands were shaky as he attempted to tie his tie. I gotta admit, I didn't expect you two to be the first to hook up in the dorms, Kaminari said. Izuku's face burned. We didn't hook up. And on the couch, no less, Saru teased. Other people need to sit there, you know. It wasn't like that at all, Izuku insisted. His face must have been as red as Todoroki's hair, or the stupid tie that wouldn't cooperate with him. We fell asleep on the couch, that's it. Todoroki chimed in. We were both fully clothed. This time, Kaminari winked at him. Izuku buried his face in his arms, which was a great moment for his father to walk into class. It forced his classmates to stop teasing him, but he made eye contact with Shouta and saw the raised brow and wanting to crawl into a hole. He was going to have to explain this to him later. Hisashi would never let him live this down. Of course, he had to talk to Shouta anyways about what Todoroki told him. It would take more than last night's conversation to settle those doubts, and Shouta would find a better way to phrase it so Todoroki understood. Thankfully, his dad was more interested in starting class than the latest teen gossip. Izuku settled with the academics. The teasing wasn't so bad during lunch. Time already had dulled the moment, and while he doubted anyone had forgotten, they'd at least dropped the subject. This left Izuku plenty of time to worry about everything else. He picked up Eri after school and brought her to the 1A dorms. She was having a post-nightmare day and clung to him more than usual. So when Shouta picked her up for bedtime, Izuku went with them to spend the night in his dad's staff dorm. In theory, it should have been the perfect time to bring up Todoroki's concerns, but Izuku saw the stack of files on Shota's desk, the unwashed dishes in the sink, and the way he kept rubbing his eyes, so he decided to wait. He'd help put Eri to bed, took care of the dishes, and then made tea for Shouta while he kept working. If Izuku could have forced his dad to go to bed instead, he would have. But with so much to do, and his dad's usual sleep schedule catered for night work anyways, that was a lost battle before it even begun. So he bid Shouta goodnight and curled up on the futon he dragged out of the living room. He got 4 hours of sleep before Eri's soft cries woke him up. Comforting her, even with Shouta's help, took an hour, and then he was too wired to go back to sleep. Shouta's hand decided to his head, ruffling his curls. Thanks, kiddo. You're a huge help with Eri. Of course, Izuku said. Eri was curled up in his lap, her little horn poking his collarbone. She's been through so much. I'll help however I can. I appreciate it. I know it's not easy waking up in the middle of the night all the time. Shouta said. I don't mind if it's for a good reason. He'd rather wake up to help Eri's nightmares, or Todoroki's tears, than deal with his own nightmares any day. Come by the staff room during lunch if you need a power nap. I will. Nodding, Shouta leaned against the wall beside him, shutting his eyes. He had the terrifying ability to sleep anywhere, at any time. Izuku was not that lucky. By the time he managed to drift off again, there was almost no point before his alarm went off. It was not his best day in class, which meant everyone worried about him. While brushing their concerns off, it sparked an idea on how to help Todoroki understand. He pulled Todoroki aside after class, letting their classmates head back to the dorms without him. Is everything alright, Midoriya? Todoroki asked. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I just figured out how to put this into words for you. You've been worried about me all day, right? Todoroki nodded. You fell asleep in English, and you've been zoning out all day. Right. But that worry? You want to do something to help? Of course, just tell me what you need. The blind trust was doing funny things in Izuku's chest, but that was not the time to focus on it. That feeling is why we have to keep the investigation against your dad going. His eyebrows pulled together. What? The other night, you didn't understand how me and my dad would think you were worth all the risk. You're worried about you and want to help you, however way we can. The same way you're feeling about me all day. That's what we're feeling about you. The tips of Todoroki's ears reddened. Oh. You'd never leave me in your situation. Izuku went on. So why would we leave you there? Tears shone in Todoroki's eyes, and he looked away. Izuku stepped forward to hug him. Does that help? Nodding, Todoroki let his head fall on Izuku's shoulder. Did you stay up all night just to prove your point? Izuku snorted. Not intentionally, but it helped. Stepping back, Todoroki adjusted his bag, and they walked to the dorms. You never did explain why you were up the other night, either. The little cheer Izuku built up crumbled at the question, flashes of his nightmares bursting through his eyes. No, I didn't. He glanced at the trees, watching a few brown leaves drift to the ground. Todoroki waited a minute. You don't have to tell me, but you should probably talk to someone. Izuku would, normally. This time of year his nightmares were always worse, and with Shouta as his father, the after effects were noticed right away and handled. Shouta would have scheduled time with his therapist. They'd be making plans to visit the cemetery. But this year was different. This year Izuku lived in the student dorms, away from Shouta. And they had Eri this year, who was traumatized as much, far worse, and far more recent. And it had been 8 years. Izuku needed to learn how to get through it on his own. He didn't need to go running to his dad every time he had a little nightmare or seek out his hugs whenever he felt a little sad. He'll be fine. Thanks, Todoroki, but I'm okay. Todoroki looked at him for a long time. I don't believe you, but I won't push. Just please, don't be afraid to reach out. I will. Izuku promised. Hopefully, he wouldn't need to. That is so cute. And was that Totodeku? I see going on there. Totodeku has been heavily hinted at. Is this a... Okay, I know it's a genfic, but like, one, I'm sorry, Hisashi and Aizawa are definitely, like... You cannot tell me that they're not, like, at least thinking of each other in a certain way. I mean, look at them. They live together, right? I bet even after the dorms are done, and let's say the dorms were done. Let's say the dorms weren't even there. Let's say Hisashi would definitely move in with them. The three, like, the two of them with the 3 kids. In fact, he would be like, yeah, put in Todoroki. I don't give a shit. Yeah, let's just adopt all the class. You cannot tell me he wouldn't. That's dating. That's dating materials. I'm sorry. Adopting kids with your best friend. I'm sorry, that's not your best friend anymore. That's your significant other. That's your spouse. That's your spouse. I'm just saying. Just saying. Anyways, I think Todoroki's gonna get emancipated. That was also a really good way to explain to Todoroki. Like, sometimes you can't explain it without being like, hey, you know, you're worried. I know for a fact that sometimes you have to explain to a victim of abuse that, hey, instead of putting it in that picture, instead, what's it called? What I had a friend do to me is they said, they put themselves in that light. They were like, hey, so I have this friend who hits me, who doesn't, you know, who does all this stuff, and they obviously twisted some things, so it was a bit different. And I felt so upset, and I was like, you have to leave. Why haven't you left? And then they said, yeah, I wonder why you haven't left, because I just described your situation. I'm not going through that. And it didn't really hit me there, right? Obviously, I had that planted in my seed, like that seed planted in my head. I was like, okay, shit, they're right? But I didn't want them to be right. I wasn't ready for them to be right. And when the time came, I finally opened up my eyes. I was like, okay, yeah. And by the time that time came, I was no longer the only one. The mistreatment started going to others, and I had to stop it, obviously, and I did, and I'm glad I did, but it was a really hard and tough decision that I still live with every day. Unfortunately, I will always be a person who has gone through such abuse, such type of stuff, unfortunately. Anyways, but that is a really good way to explain to someone. Obviously, it doesn't work for everybody. Different methods work best for different people. For an empath, it works perfectly for them. For someone who cares deeply about others, it works perfectly for that type of person, right? Especially when the person who's hurting them has a high probability of hurting other people as well. Like in Todoroki's case. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.